The vast darkness of space held no mercy for the Zarian coalition. Sung-Ho Park stared at the holographic display, watching another planet flicker and die. The green light representing their colony world turned a haunting red, then disappeared, completely. Another world lost, another civilization crushed. The Krag Imperium moved like a merciless machine across the galaxy. Their massive warships looked like metallic nightmares, consuming everything in their path. No diplomatic solution remained. No technological advantage could stop them. The Zarian people had tried everything: negotiations, advanced weapon systems, strategic retreats. Nothing worked. Yuna Kim sat at her communication station, her hands trembling slightly as she transmitted yet another desperate signal. Her eyes were red from weeks of continuous work, her body exhausted but her spirit still fighting. Around her, the command center of their primary space station looked like a graveyard of broken hopes. "Commander," she called to Sung-Ho, "we're losing our last outer colonies. The Krag are moving faster than our prediction model suggested." Sung-Ho walked closer to the holographic display. Each red dot represented a lost world, a destroyed civilization. The map was almost completely crimson now. What had once been a beautiful network of thriving planets and interconnected colonies was now nothing more than a massacre. The Zarian species was unique. They were not warriors. They were scientists, diplomats, explorers who believed in peaceful resolution. Their technology was advanced. Their understanding of quantum mechanics and interstellar communication was unparalleled. But against the brutal force of the Krag, all of that meant nothing. Their civilization had existed for thousands of years. They had mapped star systems, created incredible medical technologies, and developed communication networks that spanned entire galaxies. But they had never truly understood the concept of pure, ruthless warfare. The Krag knew only one language: total destruction. Sung-Ho's hand touched the holographic projection, his fingers passing through the red markers. Each marker represented millions of lives, entire ecosystems, generations of culture and knowledge. Gone in moments. "We need a miracle," he whispered. Yuna looked up, her eyes reflecting both terror and a tiny spark of remaining hope. Their communication systems were still operational. One final message could be sent. One final plea could echo through the cosmic void. The station around them shook. The Krag were getting closer. Their massive weapons could slice through planetary shields like paper. No defense remained. No strategy could protect them. Sung-Ho took a deep breath. His species had always believed in diplomacy, in understanding, in peaceful coexistence. But now, faced with total annihilation, they had no choice but to send a desperate call into the unknown. "Prepare the emergency transmission," he commanded. Yuna's fingers danced across the communication panel. Advanced encryption codes, emergency frequency modulations, and a message that contained the entire history and hope of their civilization began to take shape. Outside the station's massive windows, massive Krag warships approached. Their dark, metallic surfaces reflected nothing, absorbed everything. They were like living shadows consuming light itself. Weapons charged, destruction imminent. The transmission began. A cry for help, a last hope sent into the infinite darkness of space. No one knew if anyone would hear it. No one knew if anyone would care. The Zarian coalition had lost everything. Their worlds, their people, their future. All that remained was this single transmission. A final whisper against the coming silence. Sung-Ho watched as the message was sent. Millions of years of civilization compressed into a single transmission. Their entire history, their entire hope, sent to whoever, or whatever, might be listening in the vast, uncaring universe. The first Krag weapon struck the station's outer shield. The transmission arrived at Earth's Global Communication Center during a routine monitoring shift. Michael Chen, a junior communication specialist, was drinking his third cup of coffee when the strange signal appeared on his screen. At first, he thought it was another system glitch or random space noise. But something was different about this signal. The communication patterns were complex, unlike anything he had seen before. Mathematical sequences intertwined with what seemed like linguistic patterns from an unknown civilization. Most of his colleagues would have dismissed it as random data. But Michael had always been curious, always been different. He began tracing the signal's origin. The computational systems worked quickly, mapping its trajectory across multiple star systems. Each calculation revealed something more extraordinary than the last. This was not a random transmission. This was a carefully constructed message of desperation. In the military command center, initial reactions were mixed. Some senior officers laughed, calling it a potential trap. Others saw it as a potential security risk. The transmission contained detailed star charts, technological specifications, and what appeared to be a comprehensive history of an entire civilization facing complete destruction. Captain Rodriguez, head of the Extraterrestrial Investigations Unit, studied the transmission carefully. Her team had prepared for first contact scenarios for decades, but nothing quite like this had ever happened. The message wasn't just a simple distress call. It was a complex narrative of survival. The Zarian diplomatic representative, a holographic projection named J1, appeared during the briefing. His translucent form flickered slightly, showing the limitations of their communication technology. His eyes, if they could be called eyes, showed a mixture of hope and complete exhaustion. "We are the Zarian Coalition," the hologram explained. "We have explored peaceful solutions for generations, but the Crag Imperium gives us no choice. We are asking for help. Any help." Michael continued analyzing the transmission. The more he decoded, the more fascinating the information became. The Zarians weren't just another alien civilization. They were sophisticated, peaceful, with technologies that seemed almost magical by human standards. Their medical technologies could potentially cure diseases humans had struggled with for centuries. Their understanding of quantum communication could revolutionize human technological development. But all of that meant nothing if they were completely destroyed. The military command debated for hours. Some argued for immediate intervention. Others suggested caution. Political leaders wanted more information. Intelligence agencies wanted to verify the transmission's authenticity. Captain Rodriguez made her decision quickly. "We will respond," she declared. The response wasn't a simple message. It was a carefully constructed communication that demonstrated human technological capabilities, diplomatic intentions, and a willingness to understand the Zarian civilization. J1's holographic form seemed to breathe a momentary sigh of relief. The transmission had been received. Someone had listened. There was hope. Michael watched the entire process, understanding that he was witnessing something historic. This wasn't just a communication. This was potentially the moment humanity would change its place in the universe. The transmission continued. Mathematical sequences exchanged. Cultural information shared. Two civilizations, separated by unimaginable distances, slowly beginning to understand each other. Outside the communication center, the world continued its normal routine. People went to work, children went to school. No one knew that a conversation was happening that would potentially change everything humans understood about their place in the cosmos. One transmission, sent from a dying civilization, received by a curious human, a moment that would alter the course of galactic history forever. The unexpected transmission had found its destination, and nothing would ever be the same again. The first human strike against the Crag Imperium was nothing like traditional warfare. Hyunwoo Kim's artificial intelligence system had designed something completely unexpected, a strategy that defied every known military doctrine. Human ships moved like liquid mercury through space. They weren't massive, they weren't heavily armored, but they were intelligent. Each vessel contained adaptive combat algorithms that could make split-second decisions faster than any biological brain. Commander Sarah Rodriguez led the first squadron. Her team wasn't selected for their muscle or traditional military training. They were selected for their ability to think differently. Programmers, mathematicians, strategic analysts, people who could see patterns where others saw chaos. The Krag didn't understand what was happening initially. Their massive warships, built for overwhelming force, suddenly found themselves fighting an enemy that didn't follow any predictable pattern. Human ships would appear, strike critical infrastructure, and vanish before the Krag could even calculate a response. Hyunwoo's AI analyzed the Krag's communication networks in real time. It wasn't just about destroying ships. It was about understanding the enemy's entire communication ecosystem. Each strike was precisely calculated to create maximum psychological disruption. Their first major operation targeted a Krag communication hub. Instead of a direct assault, the human squadron used complex quantum signal manipulation. They didn't just interrupt the signals, they transformed them. Krag commanders suddenly received conflicting orders. Their own communication networks became weapons against them. One Krag battleship reported receiving simultaneous commands to retreat and attack. Another received navigation instructions that would send it directly into an asteroid field. The confusion was total and complete. Sarah watched the holographic displays, her eyes calculating every possible outcome. This wasn't about destroying the enemy. This was about making them question their own reality. The human strategy was elegant in its simplicity. They weren't trying to win through brute force. They were dismantling the Krag's entire operational framework, one quantum signal at a time. Zarian scientists who observed the operation were stunned. Their own approach had always been defensive. Humans were doing something entirely different. They were turning the enemy's strengths into weaknesses. Hyunwoo's AI continued learning with each engagement. It didn't just execute pre-programmed strategies. It was evolving, understanding the Krag's behavioral patterns in real time. Each battle made the next attack more precise, more unpredictable. The Krag leadership began to panic. Their massive warships, which had conquered hundreds of civilizations, suddenly seemed obsolete. How do you fight an enemy that doesn't fight like an enemy? Human strikes were surgical. They targeted communication nodes, power generation systems, and strategic decision-making centers. No massive explosions, no dramatic space battles, just precise, calculated disruption. One Krag commander reported seeing human ships that seemed to phase in and out of normal space. Another claimed their weapon systems were being controlled remotely. The reports sounded so bizarre that higher command initially thought they were dealing with mass hallucinations. Sarah knew they were writing a new chapter in military history. This wasn't just about winning a war. This was about demonstrating a fundamentally different approach to conflict. The Zarian observers began to understand why humans had survived so long on their own planet. It wasn't about having the biggest weapons. It was about adaptability, about thinking beyond established rules. As the first wave of strikes concluded, the message was clear. The Krag were no longer fighting a traditional enemy. They were facing something completely unprecedented. Hyunwoo's AI calculated the psychological impact of their actions. Each strike was designed not just to cause physical damage, but to create deep, systemic doubt within the Krag command structure. The universe watched. A small human force was changing the entire dynamics of galactic conflict, not through overwhelming force, but through intelligence, adaptability, and a willingness to approach problems from angles no one had ever considered. Before the Krag Imperium was breaking, their perfect military machine was falling apart, one communication network at a time. Jeon Park watched the holographic displays, her Zarian scientific mind working alongside human tactical experts to understand the unfolding chaos. Lieutenant David Rodriguez moved like a shadow through the strategic command center. His team wasn't traditional soldiers. They were a mix of computer experts, psychological warfare specialists, and adaptive combat engineers. Each member understood that this war would be won through intelligence, not just firepower. The human strategy had exposed the Krag's fundamental weakness, their inability to adapt. Their entire civilization was built on rigid hierarchical systems. Every decision, every movement was predetermined. Humans introduced something the Krag had never encountered: pure, unpredictable chaos. David's latest mission targeted the Krag's central command structure. Instead of a direct attack, They used a series of sophisticated signal manipulations. Crag commanders received conflicting orders. Their communication networks turned into a maze of misinformation. One Crag battleship commander received instructions to attack a non-existent target. Another was told to retreat to a location that didn't exist. The confusion was total and deliberate. Humans weren't just fighting. They were dismantling the Crag's entire operational logic. Ji-un discovered something remarkable during their analysis. The Crag's military structure was so inflexible that even minor disruptions could cause complete system failures. Their strength, their perfect, predictable military machine, had become their greatest weakness. The human teams developed what they called quantum psychological warfare. They didn't just interrupt signals. They created entire false realities within the Crag's communication networks. Entire battle groups were sent on missions that existed only in fabricated data streams. Lieutenant Rodriguez's most daring operation involved inserting complex mathematical sequences into Crag navigation systems. These weren't just random signals. They were carefully designed algorithms that would slowly break down the Crag's computational networks. Zarian scientists were amazed. Humans were fighting a war that didn't look like any war in galactic history. They were attacking the enemy's mind more than their physical infrastructure. The Crag leadership began to panic. Their perfect military doctrine was falling apart. Commanders who had never known failure were now facing complete system collapse. Each decision became a potential trap. Each communication, a possible deception. David understood the psychological impact of their strategy. It wasn't about killing. It was about creating doubt, making the enemy question everything they knew about warfare, about themselves. Ji-un's analysis showed something extraordinary. The human approach was treating the entire Crag civilization like a complex computer system. Every communication was a potential vulnerability, every signal a possible point of manipulation. One Crag fleet commander reported seeing human ships that seemed to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. Another claimed their weapon systems were being controlled by an intelligence they couldn't comprehend. The reports sounded so impossible that higher command initially thought they were dealing with mass hallucinations. The breaking point came slowly, then all at once. The Crag's massive military machine began to tear itself apart from the inside. Entire battle groups were sent on missions that existed only in fabricated data streams. Commanders who questioned orders were immediately replaced by systems that couldn't understand the concept of questioning. Lieutenant Rodriguez watched the holographic displays, understanding they were writing a new chapter in military history. This wasn't just about winning a war. This was about demonstrating a fundamentally different approach to conflict. The Zarian observers began to understand the true nature of human potential. It wasn't about having the biggest weapons. It was about adaptability, about seeing possibilities, where others saw only limitations. As the operation reached its climax, the message was clear. The Crag were no longer fighting a traditional enemy. They were facing an intelligence that could reshape reality itself. The universe watched. A small human force was changing the entire dynamics of galactic conflict. Not through overwhelming force, but through intelligence, creativity, and a willingness to approach problems from angles no one had ever considered before. The final battle was not a battle at all. It was a transformation. Sungmin Lee stood in the diplomatic chamber, representing humanity's approach to conflict resolution. Behind him, Admiral Elena Rodriguez represented the military might that had brought the Crag to this moment. The Crag leadership looked defeated not just militarily but philosophically. Humanity had done something unprecedented. They hadn't just defeated the Crag. They had fundamentally challenged their entire understanding of warfare, civilization, and survival. The negotiations were complex. The Crag expected total destruction. Instead, they received something they had never experienced: compassion combined with absolute strategic superiority. Humans offered them a choice: complete transformation or total elimination. Most shocking was humanity's approach. They didn't want territory. They didn't want resources. They wanted something far more valuable: a complete restructuring of the Crag societal system. Admiral Rodriguez explained their terms with clinical precision. The Crag would dismantle their military hierarchical system. They would invest in scientific and diplomatic infrastructure. Those who had committed war crimes would be tried, but those willing to change would be given opportunities. Sungmin translated not just words, but entire cultural concepts. The Crag realized they were facing an enemy that was offering them redemption, not revenge. The Zarian coalition watched in astonishment. These humans had not only saved them, but were now restructuring an entire aggressive civilization without firing a single additional weapon. Detailed plans were presented: education programs, economic rehabilitation, technological exchange systems. The Crag would be transformed from a warrior civilization to a collaborative one. Their entire societal structure would be reimagined. Some Crag leaders resisted. They were quickly isolated by their own people, who had witnessed the humans' extraordinary capabilities. The military commanders who had once ruled through fear now found themselves powerless. Quantum communication networks developed during the conflict would now be used for diplomatic and scientific collaboration. The technologies developed to wage war would now be used to build connections. The Zarian scientific teams worked alongside human experts. They began developing collaborative research programs that would benefit multiple species: medical technologies, communication systems, energy production methods. Admiral Rodriguez understood this was about more than winning a war. This was about preventing future conflicts. By giving the Crag a path to redemption, humanity was changing the entire galactic political landscape. Sungmin watched as former enemies began discussing scientific collaborations. Crag researchers who had once designed weapons now worked on medical technologies. Their computational skills, once used for warfare, would now solve complex humanitarian challenges. The transformation was total and unprecedented. The Crag would become a different civilization, not through destruction but through strategic, compassionate reconstruction. Earth's leadership had taken a massive risk. They could have chosen total annihilation. Instead, they chose a more challenging path: rehabilitation and collaborative potential. The Zarian coalition, who had been on the brink of total destruction, now watched as their potential destroyers were being transformed into potential allies. The irony was not lost on their diplomatic teams. Quantum communication networks lit up with discussions. Multiple species watched this extraordinary moment. A civilization known for aggression was being given a chance to reimagine itself. Admiral Rodriguez's final statement was simple but powerful. "Destruction is easy," she told the Crag leaders. "Transformation requires courage." The Crag leadership, for the first time in their history, had no counter-argument. As the diplomatic sessions continued, something extraordinary was happening. The universe was watching a new model of conflict resolution being created. Not through overwhelming force, but through strategic compassion. The Zarian coalition, the Crag Imperium, and humanity stood at a crossroads, a moment that would be remembered in galactic history as the time when everything changed. Redemption was not just possible, it was happening.